It's your old pal EMAC coming to you with one Adam Ship My Money Share as we get to navigate through a nice little, what did we say, 8-gamer here, Adam? 7 games on the main slate?
Yeah, 7 on the main slate.
We're skipping that 1 p.m. game. It is the Detroit Pistons at Philadelphia. It'll be a fun one to watch, but that one is not going to enter into our discussions. We're going to go game by game here. As a reminder, for those of you that want a free week of Osmo Premium content with everything, that includes Slack, Fantasy Cruncher add-on, multiple projection sets, multiple premium articles, all sorts of goodness, use the promo code NBA Strategy, all one word, and you'll get 7 free days of Osmo Premium content. Adam, this is going to be kind of fun because last night we did a little pre-look by position. We did the podcast, so those that are out doing errands, ticking things off the honey-do list, stuck out in the yard, they can get a nice little summary going on if they subscribe to either the YouTube channel or to iTunes. We're on both. You can just search Osmo. Obviously, if you're on the YouTube channel, you already know that, but we do have the 6-day-a-week podcast now, and that will be free for you guys. So let's talk for a minute about last night. You and I had a little discussion. I was not a fan of one Dwight Howard. I was okay with Boban, and I had my one share of Howard. That did not turn out as great as I had hoped. I was correct in that Howard played between 20 and 25 minutes. Damn, they were an effective 20 to 25 minutes, 24 technically. Talk a little bit about that. How did you think he was meshing with the dysfunctional team that is also known as the Washington Wizards?
I mean, he was obviously productive. It didn't do anything to help them not suck at basketball. But it was nice to see him go out and, play reasonable minutes, and would have played more if that game hadn't been a 30-point loss by like halftime. So I think it was really good, just from a DFS perspective for Dwight Howard. If he keeps being underpriced, then we can pretty confidently go right back to him, pretty quickly. It doesn't appear it's going to be a situation where it's like, oh, he plays 18 minutes, he plays 20 minutes, and then one game he gets like unleashed, and if you don't have him, you're completely screwed. It seems like the news that came out before lock about him not being on a minutes limit was actually legitimate news, that he was going to play his full minutes and then go lay on the floor because he's in too much pain to sit on the bench.
All right. Already in chat, they're saying the Wizards suck. We need a new team. We talked about that as well. I will be auditioning new teams beginning this weekend because I'm okay with doing that. I moved out to the DC area and I adopted the Wizards once it was clear that the Seattle Supersonics were going to be no more, and I refuse to support those that hijacked them, those Oil City or those Oklahoma City oil barons. So I'm looking at new teams. On the short list, Adam, Sacramento, because I can't pick a front-running team.
Right.
That's for sure. So I want to pick somebody that will have to kind of fight to get into the playoffs. They may win some. You're excited when they win. When they lose, it's not horrible because they were kind of expected to lose. But I can't do that with the Wizards because I can no longer support Ernie Grunfeld.
Yeah, it's tough, but I mean, I grew up on the Wizards, the Redskins, and the Orioles, so this is pretty much status quo for me, and I would expect nothing different.
Yes, I'm looking to see. Oh, I don't have my my Mariners hat. I still root for the Mariners. Yeah, they haven't made the playoffs in like 25 years or whatever it is, because that was the team I was born into. So I feel your pain, but I can't root for all losing teams. So in any event, now that we've got the little viewer count up a skosh, let's jump on into the analysis. We will go game by game here. Hey, hit that like button. I've got a new computer coming. It should arrive today, so I will be on a fresh and speedy system next Saturday. Fingers crossed that the double jinx of Adam and I with our technology wizardry doesn't ruin it. But let's get going here. We have Boston at Indiana. This game is checking in with the lowest over-under on the day at 208. Now, before we in 2014, that would be an exciting total. It'd be something we'd keep an eye on. It's about 20 points less than 1, 2, 3, 4 of the other games, and easily double digits less than the others not named Utah and Denver. We've got, let's see, Jaylen Brown is the only guy that might have any issues, but he is expected to play with a sore right foot. What do you like from this game today?
Not a whole lot. I mean, it's just not that appealing a game from a fantasy perspective, I don't think. You certainly can, look to Kyrie Irving. It's not a terrible spot for him, but again, it's just not a game that I expect to be, super high scoring. And I think that there are pretty good point guard spots to go to. We've also seen Kyrie's price start to come up a little bit, so more of just like a secondary tournament option for me. On the other side, Oladipo is a guy that I always am interested in, but it's just such a tough matchup here. He's on a back-to-back. He's apparently dealing with bronchitis, which it obviously didn't slow him down yesterday when he had one of his best games of the season, but it's still not ideal. So I just don't think there's anything that I'm super interested in here. I mean, Miles Turner, you always have upside there. You always have upside for Sabonis if he runs into a few more minutes, if Turner gets into foul trouble or something. But, again, that's basically just describing, large field multi-entry tournament plays and nothing that I'm actually interested in.
All right, I'm getting a text here, and it says this is addressed to you for some reason. It says, fella.
So this is from Lofty.
I've got to talk about the guy Victor Oladipo. Now, whenever he's below $8,000, I'm gonna have to consider him. I know this is a difficult matchup, fella, but as I'm out there getting some more vape juice, I'm definitely thinking about Victor Oladipo.
Yeah, I mean, the price tag's definitely nice, and I'm sure I'll end up with some in tournaments just for the upside. But talking about things that you're prioritizing, it's pretty tough to prioritize him in on a back-to-back against this very, very good Celtics team.
All right, let's get to a game that we can have some fun with. It's Cleveland, it's Charlotte. Now we know that Cleveland has been disappointing. We also know that Kevin Love is going to miss the next month and a half at least with his toe, which he had surgery on to finish up this week, which is frustrating for those of us that drafted him in season long. Damn it, but that's okay. That's why we like daily fantasy sports. We have Kemba Walker, who no longer seems to matter if he's home, if he's away, if he's on a back-to-back, whatever it is. Now that he has just become an absolute usage monster, he has been in the top 10 all season for usage. He has been just, I can't say enough good things about him. Even at 8,900, I'm absolutely comfortable with his price point. Let's start off with Walker. What are your thoughts there? Is he a building block for you today?
Yeah, I like him a lot. I mean, he's coming off 2 disappointing games, but those were in tough matchups against good defensive teams in Oklahoma City and Miami. There were teams where I still thought he had a chance at success because they've struggled to defend the pick and roll in particular, but he, just struggled overall. Now he's facing this Cleveland team that's just been one of the worst defenses in the NBA this season, and he still has a monster usage rate, and on top of that, 30+% assist percentage. So he's still doing basically everything for this offense. He'll play around 36 minutes as long as this game stays competitive. So I still think that he has 50 plus point upside. The price is a little more expensive than we would like, but it's also not a super deep point guard position today, I don't think, in terms of like mid-range upside. So it makes it a little bit easier to justify paying up for guys like Kemba. So, yeah, I do really like him a lot. I think it's a great spot here against the Cavs.
All right. Continuing down through the front court here, what is going on with their bench? And I say continuing through the front court because to finish that thought, Cody Zeller, Marvin Williams, not overly exciting, but there's really not much for their front court depth here. And then Tony Parker's really the only intriguing guy really coming off of the bench. How do you think this plays out against Tristan Thompson, Larry Nance? I mean, it's not like it's the most formidable front court for someone like Zeller or Williams, but their upside's capped in today's new world of NBA massive point totals.
Yeah, the front court rotation's kind of become a mess here. Like the price tags on Marvin Williams and Kid Gilchrist are both kind of intriguing, especially if you're a max entry guy, just because it is such a good matchup. And if one of them plays well, you'll probably see them play more minutes than they have been, and they would easily pay off their sub $4,000 price tags. The issue is just that you've seen Miles Bridges be inserted into the rotation on a regular basis, which takes some wing minutes away. And then also Tony Parker now playing a bunch of minutes alongside Kemba Walker in addition to his backup point guard responsibilities. So that has also kind of just like shifted guys down and taken minutes away from the likes of Marvin Williams. So, and that's something that we did expect. There were quotes in the preseason out of Charlotte about eventually getting to a closing lineup with Kemba Walker and Tony Parker on the floor together. So I don't think Parker getting more playing time is an anomaly. I think it was planned coming into the season, and it obviously makes me, concerned for the minutes of everyone that takes a hit as a result. So I think that's where it's just really become the minutes fluctuate a ton from game to game, just because there are so many guys now competing for bench minutes. And if one of them gets hot, they'll probably play more at the expense of others. But it makes it very difficult to actually project anyone to be a good play out of that group.
Yeah. So for our purposes, it does look like Walker and potentially Lamb and potentially Batum would be the plays that we would want to consider here. It is a 7-game slate. We do know that Batum does have some tremendous upside. You just never know when that's going to happen. And then Jeremy Lamb was someone that I was excited because I thought he was going to be, to borrow words from the coaching staff, quote unquote, unleashed, but he has topped 25 fantasy points just 3 times so far this season in 9 games. That is not the upside I would like to see. And he has not topped 30 fantasy points since the 3rd game of the season. Makes me a little nervous because he's starting. Yes, Kemba's siphoning a lot of the usage in such a way, but he's still getting solid minutes. He's got a decent spot in the rotation. Lamb, that is. I just don't know if I want to go there. And for me, it's one of those things where I've got a lot of bias with certain players. And he was a guy, much like his teammate Michael Kidd-Gilchrist, that I never really wanted to play. I would dabble the last 2 years when we would have Jeremy Lamb at chalk night, when he would be coming in to a good situation. We knew with injuries opening up a specific defined role or set of minutes for him. Now that he's a starter, it seems like he's losing some of that luster. Is that because he's playing with the starting unit for the majority of his minutes now?
Yeah, I mean, I think playing a bunch of minutes alongside Kemba obviously hasn't helped in terms of usage. We've seen Lamb's usage lower this season than we would see it frequently last season when he ran into big minutes. But also, he's just kind of been a casualty also of how deep the Charlotte rotation is. We've seen games this year where he doesn't get full minutes, sometimes because of blowouts, but other times we've seen Malik Monk get hot when he comes in and he stays on the floor. We've seen, different rotations where Lamb loses minutes, and it makes it so I still think he has some upside, but it's really, really tough to rely on him because the minutes are so inconsistent. And the price tag, he was down to 4,400 on DraftKings last game. I ended up playing a bunch of him then, but he's already jumped back up, 10% up to 4,900. And that kind of feels like, even though it's not a huge difference in price, that kind of just feels like the difference between what I think is a play that I'm going to take a lot of chances on and a play that I probably won't have much of. I just have trouble really getting there with much confidence. It's obviously a good matchup. It's just that, we see so much usage go to Kemba. We see the minutes, bounce around so much with all the other guys that they have in their rotation that it's tough. And Tony Parker, getting more minutes alongside Kemba certainly doesn't help.
Yeah, I'm kind of looking here at some of the game flow. And of course, naturally, I seem to have picked the game that Parker didn't play in that one. What do you think Parker's role is going to be with the closing unit?
So in their last game, we saw him close the first half alongside Kemba. They closed with Kemba, Batum, Bridges, and Hernan Gomez. So it was a weird lineup, but that's kind of the point, that it's not been particularly consistent. But Parker, I think you can start penciling into 22 to 24 minutes. Don't know when he'll consistently be closing out games, but I do think that with his price tag really cheap, he actually becomes a viable option. $4,100 playing 22 to 24 minutes against a terrible Cleveland defense. He's been very involved this season in terms of usage and assist percentage. He's still getting those backup point guard minutes where he's on the floor without Kemba. So it's not like you have to worry about his minutes really becoming less productive because he still has those. So I do think it's probably a good time to start jumping on Parker a little bit, because I think he probably only goes up from here.
Okay, that's definitely good to hear and understand. And for those of you that dip in on the weekends or don't get to listen because you have a day job, you don't get to listen to the strategy shows a lot. One of the things that oftentimes gets glossed over on the shows as they go up to lock is who is on the closing units. Now, what we mean by that is who is finishing out the games, who's on the court when the games are close. Oftentimes there may be, depending on what the starting five is, it may not be the same starting five at the end. They may drop their center if it's a more traditional type guy, get another shooter out there. If they have someone who's an incredible defensive liability, they may put in their sixth man if that's a strong defender. If the other team's going to go small or big, they may have a different unit that sort of counters that. Of course, there'll almost always be the three best players for each team will be on the floor. But in some cases, if it's like a Hassan Whiteside, may not be there depending on what the other lineup is. And that's always one of the frustrating things is you get into the fourth quarter and you're like, yeah, my guy's got 30 fantasy points. We got the whole fourth quarter. It's a close game. I'm just going to roll tonight. And then your guy gets 2 minutes in the fourth quarter. That can be a little bit frustrating. You need to understand and learn why this is happening. And that's where looking at the rotations in the game flow box scores can come in quite help. My words are not coming smoothly today, Adam. That's where they can come in to aid you. And if you look at popcornmachine.net, that's one of the ones that we refer to quite a bit. There's 3 or 4 sites out there that you can look at, but it takes a little while to get used to reading a box score that way. But it's very, very, very useful as you get into the nuances of rotations, etc. Moving on over to the Cleveland side here, who is going to fill in the void of the offense? And my wife's home, so I'm going to let you answer this question. Who is filling in the void of the offense in the absence of Kevin Love and the dozen or so shots that J.R. Smith would normally be taking?
Yeah, it's kind of just an entire mess here with Cleveland. We do have news today that Larry Drew said he's keeping the same starting lineup, but that there may be changes to the bench unit. That potentially could mean J.R. Smith being reinserted into the rotation after being taken out of it. It could also potentially mean minutes for Channing Frye. So it just makes it so that what was already a very difficult rotation to be confident in and to really like much of, it becomes even tougher. Like Jordan Clarkson is an absolute usage monster who, when J.R. Smith's not in the rotation, you can pencil him in for around 26, 27 minutes, and he actually becomes a very good value play. But if J.R. Smith's going to come back, you kind of lose the path to those extra 4 or 5 minutes, and you're stuck with like 22 minutes of Jordan Clarkson, which becomes obviously a much thinner play, and one that you can't be nearly as confident in. Colin Sexton and George Hill continue to split minutes at the point guard position. Neither one's particularly productive, and they're both priced and like high enough that there's not a ton of upside for either. Chetty Osman is very nicely priced for his minutes. He's just very inconsistent and not great at basketball. So, he's okay on a minute basis. He's he would be my favorite guy from Cleveland, but it's still just tough in this matchup to really be that excited about him. Sam Decker's been playing a ton of minutes. He's another one that would be affected by the possible rotation change with the second unit. We saw him get up around 30 minutes in his last game. He closed that one out. He played 28 minutes the game before. But if Channing Frye comes back to the rotation, that would directly affect him. Also, if J.R. Smith comes back, that's going to push more kind of like small lineups out there with Kyle Korver forcing some other guys down to the 4 and taking minutes away from Decker. So his minutes are in flux. And then you get to the center position where you have Tristan Thompson and Larry Nance splitting minutes. Nance is someone that if I'm max entering tournaments, I basically force into 5% or so of my lineups, just because there will be games where he gets the bulk of those minutes at center where Thompson's not playing well or Thompson gets in foul trouble or whatever. And if you get 26 to 28 minutes of Larry Nance, he becomes a very good play at 5,400. It's just that we have to project him for 18 to 20 minutes because Thompson, more times than not, is going to get the bulk of those minutes. So this Cleveland team as a whole, it's just an absolute mess right now. The fact that they've talked about changing their rotation again makes it even more of a mess, and something that I just really can't go to any parts of with any confidence.
And then the one thing we also want to remember is, for those of you that are new to the NBA, is Larry Drew had a moment where he was the head coach of the Milwaukee Bucks literally for about a minute. It was one season. It was coming off 3 years after he had coached the Atlanta Hawks to a middling record where they were just right around .500 most seasons or just above it. They were a 41 team, and they had a nice year, the lockout season, but they never really made it beyond the first round of the playoffs. He coached the Bucks for one season. I bring this up because he was one of the most infuriating coaches with regards to his rotations. We called it the beautiful mind of Larry Drew. You just had no idea what was going on there, and it seemed that was where Jason Kidd also picked up some of his early tendencies after he took that team over. That's the one concern that I have is now the head coach, especially after we look at this nice game logs. We're literally, or game flow box scores, Adam, we're literally every player has a direct backup, and if you go back 3 or 4 games, nothing's really changing amongst these rotations. Now we've got a wild card in the mix who doesn't want to be called the Cavs interim coach because he wants a pay raise. So he's calling himself the voice of the locker room.
Yeah, that whole situation's a mess. It's just really important, I think, to keep an eye on news coming out of there today up till lock. It won't seem like important news because it's not going to be like, so-and-so is not in the starting lineup or so-and-so is scratched. But if we can get some kind of update on what they're doing with J.R. Smith off the bench, it does really impact a couple of pieces that I would have interest in on Cleveland.
All right, are we good to move along to our next outing?
Yeah.
Little bit of news here. We're going to go to the Miami Heat, who are taking on the Atlanta Hawks. This is a good game for some people maybe to get a little bit of a rest on the Heat. Oh, wait. Eric Spoelstra has now announced that Goran Dragic, the Dragon, will be without or will not play because he has a sore toe. So he was unable to practice. Now, this is a legitimate injury. He was unable to practice and did receive a cortisone shot. Surgery is not on the table yet. So this is a real injury. So keep an eye on that one going forward. But this could open some stuff up for some of the backcourt. I mean, thank God we've got this iron group of, oh, wait, what's that you say? Oh, Tyler Johnson didn't have a migraine, but he was sick and didn't practice on Friday. It was Dwayne Wade that had a headache, but didn't practice on Friday. Oh God, what are we going to do, Adam? We should have some value here in a cherry matchup against Atlanta, but we don't really know what's going to happen. Now, to be fair, Spoelstra did say that he thinks Johnson and Wade will play on Saturday night. Talk to me about the backcourt first here.
So yeah, I mean, assuming Johnson and Wade play, they both get a boost with Goran Dragic out. Obviously, more ball handling responsibilities and more minutes for these guys, especially Tyler Johnson. Will get more point guard minutes. Wade should get a few more minutes off the bench to fill in. I would expect that you see Wayne Ellington finally get some run as well. And then Josh Richardson would get a boost because he also is someone that benefits when he plays without a ball dominant point guard like Dragic on the floor. So I do think that you would get some pretty good value from this team. Wade and Johnson being the two obvious ones.
All right. Hassan Whiteside, someone we know and love dearly, particularly in the DFS world. He's 8,000 even on DraftKings. He has an intriguing matchup here going against Alex Lynn and Dwayne Dedmon. Is he deserving of core consideration for you on Saturday night, Adam?
Yes and no. I do like Whiteside here quite a bit. I think anyone who watches the shows know that I like Whiteside pretty much every time he takes the floor, and this is no exception in a spot, against an Atlanta team that I think is a good spot for him. Looking at DraftKings pricing, center does have a ton of upside for a couple $1,000s cheaper, with guys like JaVale McGee and Yusuf Nurkic both being 6,400. So that will probably end up somewhat limiting how much Whiteside I'm able to get, but I still think that, you project Whiteside to play 32, 33 minutes here, and it's, a perfectly fine spot for him. He's played 107 minutes since last season without Dragic or James Johnson on the floor, has a 20.9% usage rate, has averaged, well over a point per minute. So I don't think he should be I don't think Dragic missing will have a negative impact on him, at least, not too much. So I do like him if you can get to him.
All right. Knowing that we might have to go a little bit deeper here without the Dragon, Wade and Johnson, I think, are both fine plays at their respective price points. I don't think I'd want both of them on the same team. So if you're going to be doing a lot of mass multi-entry, you can always set up a little rule, particularly in Fantasy Cruncher, which you can also get as an add-on here at Osmo.com. But you can just set a group, you put both the guys in it, and you choose the do not play more than one of this group. And that's a way to easily make sure that you don't get both those guys on your teams. Now, the reason I say that is the chances of both of them having a really, really good game, probably not that great. So I'd rather roll the dice with one or the other. One guy I do not think will land on my team, and this will be the last guy I'm curious about for the Heat, but Rodney McGruder, who has played pretty well this season in the absence of a variety of players. His production's dipping down. His price is way, way up. I don't think I want to play him, but I never really X anybody out of my player pool for basketball when I'm running all of these lineups. That's a little trick that I have learned the hard way and learned by listening to a variety of people that are really good on this particular subject. But I don't see him really getting more than 20 to 25 fantasy points, DraftKings scoring. Any thoughts on McGruder before we look at the Hawks?
Yeah, it's not someone I expect to get to. I mean, his assists have gone up this year, which has been nice. That's something that, obviously you would expect to continue with Dragic not on the floor. But the price tag's just so high that I can't imagine I end up with much, if any, McGruder.
All right, chat. This is my favorite comparison. They are likening me to the high school substitute teacher, which I think Adam is pretty much the number one on the board comparison I get when I pop up on these shows. So I have a great capacity for fun. I like to find the humor and stuff. So yes, I normally when I'm typing in chat, I'm just teasing along with everybody else. I'm generally good natured. So the baller, not worried about it, but hopefully you do enjoy the show. Hopefully you do take some stuff away from here. And this is just oftentimes what you'll see when we change up some of our host pairings. You get a different dynamic, and you may hear things that it's the same type of information or the same side of strategy or skill set, but because you've heard it in a different voice, tone, intonation, etc., or coming at it from a different angle, it's all of a sudden it'll click and stick with you. So it is something that is valuable, and I've been doing this for a long time. It's a lot of fun, so I enjoy it. Adam, we talked a little bit on the podcast here about Jeremy Lin, who had been getting some more minutes alongside Trae Young. He is rather discounted here on in this game for the Hawks. He is at 3,800 on DraftKings. Is he someone that now that you have had a night to sleep on it and think about it, still someone that you think is a reasonable play here?
Yeah, if you're max entering, he's not someone that I would put in a core. Like, I feel more confident in Tony Parker than Jeremy Lin if I have to pick between one of the point guards who's now starting to get minutes alongside the starter. I feel better about Parker, but we've seen 2 games in a row now where Lin has played a few minutes alongside Trae Young. That's obviously very, very important for Lin's value going forward. Trae Young is the future point guard of this team. Jeremy Lin's not going to just start taking minutes from Trae Young. So if he's going to start playing enough minutes to be fantasy relevant, it's going to have to be alongside Trae Young in addition to being the backup. So seeing that happen in the last couple of games, is nice. And with his price tag really low in these large top-heavy tournaments, he's the kind of guy that whatever game Jeremy Lin finally goes out and plays like 24 minutes and takes minutes from Bembry or takes minutes from, different position, but ends up, taking minutes from like Vince Carter or something, that's going to be a game where he wins someone a tournament. And having him sprinkled into lineups in these top-heavy tournaments, until that happens, I think is a long-term profitable approach, just because obviously once it happens and everyone's going to be aware of it. So just noting that he's starting to play more minutes alongside Young, it's not to say that there's a lot of confidence in him putting up a big game tonight. It's just that it's certainly him trending in the right direction. And I want to have him, whatever game he does, finally put it together.
All right. One other thing that's fun to think about is pace. And we all know that it's gone up this year for a variety of reasons. Metrics showing that getting the shots off are earlier in the shot clock tend to be more efficient shots, because by the time you screw around and waste 7-8 seconds, you may not be getting a better shot, or you've worked your way in closer to the basket and those aren't always as valuable shots depending on where you are in relation to three-pointers. So we've seen a ton of teams embrace that. We also have the shorter shot clock in a couple different situations, and advancing the ball in certain out-of-bounds plays in different situations. So this has all contributed to move the pace up. But if we look at this relationally, Miami has a top 10 pace this year. Last year, they were bottom 5. 2 years ago, again, these are the post-LeBron era, they were bottom 10. So we have to sometimes think about what our preconceived notions are for some of these teams. Now, Atlanta is number 1. So we're going to see a lot of up and down play here, and there could be some people stepping into some intriguing games. If we look amongst some of the guys that are going to have to be guarding Hassan Whiteside, we know that it'll be Alex Len. I use the term guarding loosely. And then Dwayne Dedmon, who's actually a relatively decent defender. Either of these guys in play for you at their well-reduced prices of $4,700 for Len, $4,300 there for Bembry on DraftKings, going against Whiteside when we know Whiteside tends to draw a ton of fouls against opposing bigs?
I'll always have interest in Len when he's sub 5K, just because he's so productive on a permanent basis when he is able to stay on the floor. There's obviously a lot of risk there, but I just think that there's upside. Dedmon's the one that I'm really interested in, though. His price tag keeps falling. His minutes haven't been there, but it's been completely because of fouls. He's just been in massive foul trouble each of his last couple of games. His price tag's fallen, but we've seen him obviously he's playing the backup center minutes to Len when he's not in foul trouble, but we've also seen him get some time at the 4. If Miami goes with a Whiteside Olynyk lineup here, that's certainly a lineup that Dedmon can play alongside either Len or Miles Plumlee potentially. So I still think that barring foul trouble, you get enough minutes from Dedmon for him to actually be a good play at 4,300. And he just doesn't have any traction in terms of ownership because his game logs are so ugly. People haven't really realized that, I think, the role that he's actually going to have on this team when he's not in foul trouble.
All right, couple good questions here in chat. Let's talk about this one real quick. For if you're doing 20 players, 20 lineups, are you okay Xing out players? I think that's perfectly fine, and I think if you're running 150, you can X them out too. Here's the reason why I say I try not to close anybody off, and this goes for football as well, because if you're doing a bunch of lineups, you never know what random combinations are going to come together. Now, as there are players that pop up, and I'm like, why the hell is this guy in the lineup? You want to investigate it. Did you have a wrong minutes projection for basketball? Are you doing something weird? Did you fat finger something or hard code a formula you forgot about when you were pulling data into your spreadsheet before you loaded it into your optimizer? These are things that happen sometimes, because yesterday I had Allen Hot Sauce Williams projected for 29 points. Adam, he has not played this season, or he may have played the second game of the year. Oops, I had something hard-coded, brought the player in, and all of a sudden he's popping in my crunch. You got to go investigate stuff like that. So I like to say I don't leave them out, but I may tamp somebody down. I may want to understand why someone is showing up that I wasn't expecting. But when you're down to 20 teams, another way you can consider doing it is perhaps you just create a specific player pool. And this is something I used to do in prior years when I was playing. It really wouldn't go more than the 20 max, or I'd hand build a dozen or so teams at the most. And that was something I found where I said, okay, here's where I know what my value plays are. Here's where I know what I want the good point per dollar plays that are a little more expensive. And then here are the stars. What can I do when I mix and match these together? And when you're hand building those, you can also look at a little bit more of a story. Can I correlate some players? Can I do in a game? If I think it's going to be high scoring, I don't want 3 players on one side and nobody on the other, because if it's going to be a high scoring game, someone's going to be getting some of those points, ideally at one of the price points you have an open slot for. So you want to come back with it with players like that. So that's a variety of ways to skin the cat here. What was your take, Adam? Because I know prior to this year, you would do a lot of hand-built lineups and have a specific core as you just build 10 or 15 lineups across the tournaments.
Yeah, I play when in my like 3 max or 20 max, I definitely use a smaller pool of players. The idea being, when you have 150 lineups, having you can get, you have enough lineups, you can get 2 to 3% of some, very low probability cheap punt, and that's perfectly fine. When you're playing 20 lineups, even if you play someone in one lineup, you're at 5%. And if you start mixing in, a bunch of these low probability guys, it takes up such a high percentage of your total, lineup exposures. If you have a really, really low probability punt play in 4 of your 20 lineups, suddenly more times than not, that's 20% of your your pool is just dead. And so I do use a tighter player pool there. Also, the tournaments that you're playing in for 3 max and 20 max aren't the 60 to 100,000 person tournaments where you really kind of need like the nut lineup. You're not competing against as many lineups. You don't have to take on as many just, kind of, for lack of a better word, bad plays. So yeah, I definitely in 3 max and 20 max use a much tighter pool of players.
All right, last kind of thought that we have, and then we'll move on to the next game. But for the Hawks, we have their wings, and it's hard to tell exactly what's going to happen. We've seen Bembry have some amazing games out of nowhere with an outlier rebounding performance was what drove one of them. We have Kent Bazemore, who has his moments throughout the year. He's probably going to have 15 games or about 1 in 4 games where he gets 40 fantasy points. He's probably also going to have 10 games where he gets less than 20 fantasy points, and the rest of the time he's going to be a whole lot of meh. And then you have Taurean Prince, who we thought was going to improve this season, and I still think he will, but he's checking in at DraftKings at 6,300, and he hasn't crossed the 30 fantasy point threshold in 2 weeks. Adam, I'm not really excited by these guys, but this is an up-tempo game. I don't know how much defense is going to be played. There's got to be someone here that looks a little shinier than the rest.
Yeah, I mean, Bazemore and Prince have upside any given night. It's just tough to feel confident in either of them because Atlanta's another team that it's kind of like Charlotte. They just have a bunch of bodies now in their rotation that make it so, especially if guys like Prince or Bazemore aren't playing well, you're going to see them play closer to 30 to 32 minutes instead of the 36 that you would really, really like. You have DeAndre Bembry in there taking minutes. You have Vince Carter still playing, 18 to 24 minutes, depending on the night. You have Amari Spellman. Kevin Huerter's questionable, but he's been in the rotation. Alex Poitras is back. There's just a ton of bodies here that can take up minutes, and it leads to a flatter rotation. It leads to less confidence in anyone getting there. So that combined with, a good Miami defense, it certainly makes these guys nothing but secondary tournament plays for me.
All right, moving into the fourth game of the night, we have Houston favored by 8.5 in Chicago. Both these teams are on a back-to-back. Both James Harden and his coach, Mike D'Antoni, have said that he is probable to play this evening. He's been dealing with a sore hamstring. It was just a grade 1 plus strain, which was not up to the grade 2 strain that he was dealing with last year, so he has missed the last few games, but this has been his sort of targeted and planned return date. Chris Paul had a phenomenal game last night. If you want to read the story or go look on Twitter, you can see he had a players-only huddle during the game. They told the coaches, why don't you guys just stay there? We need to say a few things. And he wanted to get his team fired up playing defense, and it worked, of course, because they went on a run there and took care of business against Brooklyn. But with Harden back, Paul becomes less exciting at 8,800. Eric Gordon, who heading into last night's game was shooting 22% of the field over his previous 5 games, 15% from downtown. He loses a little bit of luster. We have Carmelo Anthony, who Adam is convinced is ruining the Rockets in and of themselves. Is there anybody playable against the Rockets tonight with the weak competition? Maybe Clint Capella's the one name really coming to mind for me.
Yeah, it's kind of a tough spot because Chicago is such a bad team defensively that there is a ton of upside even with James Harden back. The problem is that you've seen the price tags on a lot of these players rise to where they're not going to be in optimal lineups, at the very least, just because they are kind of overpriced for their production alongside Harden. You look at Chris Paul since the start of last season, he's played a little over 1,000 minutes alongside Harden. He's averaged just shy of 1 DraftKings point per minute, 20% usage, 27% assist percentage. Then he, dominates in his 8 or so minutes on the 8 to 10 minutes without Harden on the floor. But his price tag, has risen a little bit because of his time without Harden. Harden himself is less productive with Chris Paul on the floor, and then Carmelo Anthony doesn't do him any favors in that regard either. He's still very productive. He's averaged 1.3 DraftKings points per minute alongside Paul since last season. So I do like Harden here still at $11,000 against the Bulls. He did go through a full practice. I think he could have played yesterday. It's just there was no need to do it on a back-to-back. So unless I see something different, I don't expect him to be limited here. So I like him. You mentioned Capella. I like him quite a bit. obviously a nice matchup against the Bulls, but he also is more productive when James Harden is on the floor. They just have a very good rapport in the pick and roll. I think that, Capel's price tag came up a little bit, but still, very, very reasonable play. He would be my favorite play from the Rockets.
All right. Couple questions. Oop, getting a little bit of echo there. A couple questions in chat. They're talking about optimizers. Reminder, if you use the promo code NBA Strategy, you can get a free week of premium Osmo content. That does include the Fantasy Cruncher optimizer. It comes with multiple projection sources, including those of Josh Engelman and Andrew Barron, which were the FanVice projections. Those are the ones that I use when I'm playing, and I'm having a reasonably good season. So firsthand knowledge, they seem to be pretty adequate, and I am using Fantasy Cruncher, so it's a lot of fun there. Promo code NBA Strategy, 1 free week of all Osmo premium content, including Slack. It's a good time. Jump on in. Moving here to the Chicago side, this has been a bit of a disappointing season for them with injuries to Chris Dunn, who's going to miss about 6 weeks. We know that Lauri Markkanen is out. We know that Jabari Parker can't quite keep his head on straight. Zach Attack was dealing with injuries of his own. He has been putting up some phenomenal numbers. I do like him in this particular matchup. I'm not a huge fan of Justin Holiday, though he's had a couple good games. His shooting is just absolutely atrocious, and at some point that's going to abandon him. And then we have Cameron Payne. We're on the campaign trail. He's under 4K. We're obligated to talk about him. Who, if any of those, is Chris Paul going to guard?
Hadn't thought about it. Probably Payne. Yeah, I don't know. I hadn't given that any thought.
I only bring that up because if he's on Payne, I'm happy. I'm going to let Payne probably slide to the wayside. Happy with Zach. If he's on Zach, then I like Payne more, which is just why I was asking that question.
Yeah, I mean, it's just a bad Houston defense. I don't think it really matters that much.
Excellent. Looking at the backcourt here, anybody you're prioritizing for the Bulls?
Yeah, I mean, Zach LaVine, he's the guy that this entire offense runs through. He's going to play 35, 36 minutes. Houston defense has been awful. He's going to chuck, 20-plus shots pretty much every game. So until his price tag rises significantly, I'm going to keep just playing Zach LaVine as much as I can, especially in a nice matchup like this.
All right.
I do think Cameron Payne at 3,900 is too cheap on DraftKings, though, with multi-position eligibility as well. He didn't close yesterday. You had Ryan Arcidiacono get the closing minutes. That is, obviously a concern with him, but it's factored into his price. And in games where Payne is playing well, I still think he has the upside for like 28 to 30 minutes. So I think 3,900 for him at low ownership is pretty appealing.
All right. Jabari Parker, do you think he'll end up with dealing with PJ Tucker will be on him? I asked for that one because I would have thought as things have really opened up, remember at the beginning of the season, he was a little salty coming off the bench. Now he's got more or less unfettered access to 15 plus shots every night, and he really hasn't been doing much with them. Any thoughts on Jabari in this one?
Yeah, I would expect him to see plenty of PJ Tucker. And Parker's just, it's a pain in the ass because he sucks. He's inconsistent, but he's going to get shots up. He does take a usage hit playing alongside LaVine with the starters, down to about 22% instead of the 26 to 28 that we were seeing off the bench. But at only $6,000 and still locked into big minutes in a favorable matchup here, against this Houston team, it's still appealing to play him. It's not someone that I'm going to put, a ton of exposure in, but I'm perfectly fine, playing around 20, 25%, probably matching the field because he does have upside. It's just inconsistent because he is scoring dependent. He does get less shots alongside LaVine, and he is an inconsistent scorer.
Let's continue on here. 3 games to go. We have the New Orleans Pelicans. We have the San Antonio Spurs. Pelicans, kind of interesting. We already know that Elfrid Payton is going to be out. That, of course, will boost one Jrue Holiday. That does not hurt Eton Moore either. We know that Julius Randle's still dealing with the sore foot, the plantar fasciitis, but he is probable. Darius Miller, kind of an afterthought, listed as questionable. He's missed a few games. And then the crown jewel of them all, Adam's current favorite DFS player at this point in the season, Anthony Davis, who has missed 2 games with an elbow. He got ruled a game time decision with I want to say, I wasn't following along on Twitter and I wasn't playing him, so I wasn't worried about it. But it sounds like they thought he was going to start for about 10 minutes or so prior to the tip-off of his last game. And then with about 2 minutes left, he was ruled out. How are you feeling about the Brow this evening?
Yeah, I'm total guessing game on if he plays. Like, I think probably 95% of the NBA would be playing with his injury, but it's him. So it's gonna. I mean, the guy's missing multiple games because his elbow hurts. And the game he did play, he had like a 19% usage rate, probably because his elbow hurts. I mean, it's a complete guessing game just because the guy doesn't play through any pain ever. So if he does play, I think it's a perfectly fine spot for him. There will be concerns because even if he plays, he's still Anthony Davis. He's, we saw the one game he played, he shot the ball 16 times and had a 19% usage rate. So there's still concerns, but there's no question he has, still plenty of upside in this matchup. It's a bad Spurs defense that basically lost all of their good defenders from last season. And Davis, just dominates usage and assists and rebounds on this team now that Boogie Cousins is gone. Going back to last season, he's averaged about 1.6 DraftKings points per minute without Cousins on the floor. So if he plays, he becomes a really, really, good play, even though there is some risk of him not being as aggressive as normal. If he doesn't play, then obviously it opens up minutes for Julius Randle. He becomes a very good play, whereas he's pretty much priced out of consideration if Davis does play. Mirotic becomes a little bit better play. The price tags come up on him, and it is kind of scary to play him at a price tag over $8,000, but he has been a very high usage player this year. He has been very productive. The minutes are there, and he gets a boost if Davis sits as well. So those guys, Mirotic becomes a secondary option. Randall basically loses any value to me if Davis plays. If Davis is out, they're both really good plays. Drew Holiday is a good play regardless. San Antonio, without DeJounte Murray, they just struggle defensively against, in the backcourt. You're still going to have Holiday handling the ball a ton with Elfrid Payton out. If Davis is in, you'll see usage go down for Holiday, but he should still get plenty of assists. If Davis is out, you'll see a monster usage rate as well. So kind of regardless, I like Holiday in this spot. He should get a ton of minutes also.
All right. Yeah, the pricing is a bit much on some of this. Looking at the Spurs side, 4,200 for Pau Gasol, quite interesting. Patty Mills, 3,700. If you're looking for a punt, an extreme punt, he does have the ability to get to 20 fantasy points. Again, may not be what we need in today's day and age of 2018 NBA basketball, but he is super duper cheap. You may be playing some sort of late slate, so I do think he's in consideration there. Main slate, your mileage may vary. Rudy Gay, rather intriguing. LaMarcus Aldridge, very intriguing. DeMar DeRozan, this should be a fun one because the Pellies, as we know, have the third highest pace in this on the season. San Antonio is the fourth lowest, so could give them a few extra possessions in this particular matchup. Talk to me about the Spurs, Adam. What do you think here? Let's start at the top with one DeMar DeRozan. Are you going to have some double Ds in your life on Saturday?
I kind of hate the prices on these guys. DeRozan obviously has a monster ceiling. He's gone over 60 points already this season. He plays huge minutes. It's an up-tempo game. All that's nice, but I do have him dropping off a bit in the assist department. He has around a 34% actual assist percentage this season. I have him with a 26% expected assist percentage. So while that's still really, really good, I think that the price is a little higher than it really should be, based on past production. That being said, there's not really a ton of upper mid-range guys that I love on this slate, so it makes it a little bit easier to get to DeRozan. I like Aldridge a lot. The price tag is a little bit more appealing, I think, at 8,300. So that's a perfectly fine play. And then Rudy Gay would be my third favorite out of that group. But if he's going to play 32 minutes here, it's still a fine spot.
All right. If we're looking for some discounts, any consideration for Boom Boom Pow, perhaps Marco Bellinelli?
Who was the first guy you asked about?
Boom Boom Pow. Come on, Black Eyed Peas.
I thought you
it's
said
2008. You're still 2000 and late, Adam. Come on.
I thought you said Powell, like the guy on the map.
No Dallas and no Toronto, so no Powell tonight.
Yeah, no, I mean, I just don't. The productive players on this team don't get the minutes, and then the guys like Bryn Forbes just aren't productive. But Bellinelli would be the guy that, if I had to take a value guy from the Spurs, he'd be the one I went to.
All right, let's move along here. We have Utah heading up to Denver. I had mentioned on the podcast, Adam, that Utah is the one team that doesn't have as much trouble playing in Denver because the Salt Lake City is at elevation itself. Now, we know Denver, of course, is the Mile High City because it's at 52,000, 52,000, good God, nobody could breathe. And they'd be outside the atmosphere. But 50,280 is 1 mile worth of feet, and that is where the Pepsi Center is at. Do you know how high, if you were guessing, and this is just a guess because I didn't know either, but where do you think Salt Lake City checks in?
3,742.
Okay. God, you nailed it. Exactly. That's unbelievable.
Sure.
Okay. 4,200 is the actual answer. So you weren't that far off. So if you think about it, that's just 1,000 feet difference. So then I went and started looking up buildings that were as tall or taller than 1,000 feet. Did you know that the new Trade Center is 1,700 feet tall?
Wow. No, I didn't.
That's it. Just trying to put down because you're like, oh, well, it's 1,000 feet taller. That's still a lot taller. There's buildings that are definitely taller than 1,000 feet. Just perspective. It's kind of interesting. Now, coastal teams, yeah, that's playing in either location. That's a lot of altitude to deal with there. And we know that a lot of times people forget that the Jazz is one of the better home court advantages in the league, but it's not quite as good as Denver, but it's still pretty darn good. Now, it's just background for people to file away here. But in today's game, we have Jokic and Rudy Gobert that are kind of going to be the centerpieces for their respective teams. Let's start there before we work our way out. They have both played each other relatively tough. They've got 4 matchups over the last 2.5 seasons. They both had various injuries, so they didn't play or they didn't match up in the games even when their teams were playing. But against each other, they combined have 2 games above 42 DK points. Not really excited by these guys, but Jokic is so fun to watch, and he is so good. I still think today might be a bit of a stay away if you're just playing a handful of lineups. How are you approaching the pivot men in this game?
Yeah, Jokic is a tough one because the price tag has come down for the matchup, and anytime I can get Jokic at around 9K, it's really appealing. The problem is you have Whiteside for $1,000 less, who clearly has a really high ceiling as well. You have the guys that I mentioned earlier in Nurkic and McGee, both at 6,400. It just makes it kind of tough to justify paying all the way up for Jokic when there's that much upside available for less. That's without even mentioning guys like Wendell Carter they're even cheaper, or Len, that have upside. So it's just, I don't think it's a position where I'm going to want to pay all the way up for him. Gobert, again, it's just kind of an ugly price tag. Paying more money for Gobert than for Whiteside doesn't really feel like a great idea. So I probably won't end up with much of either, and I'll probably not feel great about it until hopefully after the game ends.
All right, moving over to the Jazz here. Of course, they're playing on a back-to-back. We did have Ricky Rubio have a fantastic game, 32 minutes. He had a 20 and 10 with 22 points, 11 rebounds. That's good to see because oftentimes scoring is what holds him back. Dante Exum, little disappointing. He was coming off the bench, still relatively cheap, but I think he was 3,800, 3,900 on DK last night. He wasn't horrible, but we were hoping for more than just 19 minutes. Royce O'Neal, we said there wasn't a ton of upside there. That was an extreme floor price play. I don't want to say he disappointed. He didn't do anything, but that wasn't really an unexpected outcome. I'm looking for additional news here on Mitchell. Nothing yet has been posted. It was a tweaked hamstring, and no hint on whether he may or may not play yet. But they're still West Coast, so I'm sure they have not had their shoot around yet. Let's assume he does not play. How are you going to approach the Jazz backcourt with Rubio and Exum and Grayson Allen? And I guess let's lump O'Neal in there as well, even though he's more of a swingman.
Yeah, so if he doesn't play, then I want to go right back to Rubio. I thought he was easily one of the top plays on the slate last night in a tough matchup against Memphis. Denver's been very good defensively this year as well, but at the very least should be a faster paced game against a good defense. Rubio, since the start of last season, without Donovan Mitchell or Rodney Hill on the floor, has averaged just about 1 fantasy point per minute, 23.7% usage, 35.8% assist percentage. Just too cheap of a price tag for a guy that probably plays like 34 minutes if he stays out of foul trouble. He only played like half of a minute to start the second half yesterday because he picked up, I think it was his fourth foul. So I really like Rubio. I liked him a ton in a tougher matchup yesterday. So I'll be going right back there. Where it gets dicey though is with these value guys because they certainly are cheap enough where they can offer you upside. It's just that the minutes are a mess. Like, that the starters, with the exception of Favors, are all going to play big minutes, and Jay Crowder is going to play big minutes off the bench. So it kind of leaves like hot hand for one of these guys, and we can't even really look at yesterday's rotation with much confidence because Exum was in foul trouble, Allen was in foul trouble, O'Neal I don't think was in foul trouble, though he may have been. But the point being that we can't really take a whole lot away from that game. We know Grayson Allen started. It seemed like Allen was going to play a lot of minutes if he didn't keep fouling people. So at a minimum price tag, he would, I guess, be the guy that I like the most, but there still ends up being a ton of risk there. Exum, the same stuff we talked about yesterday applies. He's been very productive this year in terms of usage rate and assist percentage. I expect him to get, all of the backup point guard minutes. It's just a matter of how much he plays alongside Rubio and how productive he is alongside Rubio when he doesn't have the ball in his hands. So it becomes, a very risky play, but there's still some upside there. So the point being, like, Rubio would be the one that I'm really confident in. And then the other guys, I would certainly have exposure to, but I don't want my night hinging on any of them.
Okay, that's fair enough here. One of the things that we've struggled with over the years was what exactly is Mike Malone going to be doing with his rotation? Well, thankfully, he got Kenneth Faried out of there, even though Kenneth Faried rarely played when he should and did play when we didn't expect him to. He's not there in the mix anymore. But now, who's assumed that role? Apparently, Juancho Hernangomez. Now he being Coach Malone has shortened his rotation, but on back-to-backs he will be extending them. These are his words. When he plays more, it's going to encapsulate Hernangomez getting some time. When it's less, he could be the short guy out because for whatever reason they want to keep playing Torrey Craig. What are you doing with the mediocre wings here for the Nuggets? And then we'll cleanse the palate back with the guards here because that's a much more intriguing topic. But Hernangomez, Craig, and let's throw in Monte Morris here.
Do the Nuggets play tomorrow?
Well, I will find that out. Let's assume they do not.
So the quote was that on non-back-to-backs, they're going to run a tighter rotation?
Yes.
Okay. Then, yeah, because I was looking at the game against Cleveland, and I don't know what the hell that rotation was. But if we assume that they're going to go back to their normal rotation, then
they don't play until Monday. I've got that there.
You said they do not?
They do not play till Monday, so no back-to-back here.
Yeah, so then I would assume you go back to your normal rotation where you basically had Malik Beasley had replaced Hernangomez and was getting the minutes behind Torrey Craig. So I was projecting Craig for 22 or 23 minutes, but Beasley to get the rest. So around 25, 26 minutes for Beasley. You had Monte Morris playing a bunch alongside Jamal Murray recently, which is nice. He's kind of taken over that combo guard role, and it locks him into 24 to 26 minutes any given night, which at a really cheap price tag makes him affordable. I do like that Jamal Murray's price has come back down to account for the matchup. He's down to $6,600, and I think that does give him some upside. Obviously it's a tough matchup against a good Jazz defense. They play slow, but I just think that with the amount of minutes Murray's been playing lately, that he still has upside there despite the matchup.
Right. The guards. We do like the guards here. You kind of hit on those guys. Anybody deep in the rotation that you'd like to mention as we finish up this game here? Perhaps a Trey Lyles going against his former mates.
It's just tough with those guys because Lyles and Millsap are splitting minutes, and they're both good enough players that you don't really expect either one to have a game where they don't play a lot. Or where like they just basically sit on the bench and the other guy plays like 36 minutes. So it's kind of tough to go to either one of those guys.
All right, little housekeeping. Hit that like button. It does definitely help us out, especially since we're putting these shows in front of the paywall and they are free. You want to take a gander behind the paywall, use promo code NBA Strategy, all one word. You'll get 1 free week of all Awesemo premium content. That does include the Fantasy Cruncher add-on, as well as multiple articles, projections, and the Slack chat. Slack chat is definitely where it's at. It's a good time to talk about all things DFS and things not DFS. This is the question. I said I would answer any question. D. Shook asks, if you're at Olive Garden, would you go with the chicken parm or the chicken Alfredo? Well, I have not eaten at the Olive Garden, I want to say, in 4 or 5 years. Not that I'm against it. It just so happens to be right next to our second favorite restaurant that we go to. So if we're going to drive 25 minutes away from the house, we're going to go to that restaurant instead of the Olive Garden. But let's talk Italian food, because we do like that, and when we go out for Italian fairly regularly. My wife's favorite dish is chicken parm. Mine is chicken Alfredo. So both bases covered. Voting for me, it's going to be the chicken Alfredo. Prefer that over plain Alfredo, and then she will go with the chicken parm 10 times out of 10. Adam, final game of the night here. We have the Lakers. We have the Portland Trailblazers. Lakers are as we had some fun on the podcast talking about them. They're not in disarray, but Magic's, firing the team up a little bit, or firing the coaches up. I don't think the coach will be fired. That would be the youngster Luke Walton. But at the top here, we have some intriguing plays. We have LeBron, who is going to be doing some LeBron things, I would imagine, and continuing to just produce his very, very solid lines. He's priced up there. He's a tick below Anthony Davis, a tick above James Harden, but I'm good with him. Damian Lillard has had a few good games. Hopefully someone in the crowd will inspire him to do a lot of shooting and take over the fourth quarter again. Yusuf Nurkic going against JaVale McGee. Good God, I like both of them. They're both at 6,400 on DraftKings. Amongst this this quartet, break it down here for us, because I have a feeling there will be some healthy representation from all 4 of them in your lineups this evening.
Yeah, I mean, this is just a game that I obviously really like. Starting with the bigs, you have Nurkic, who is really always one of my favorite tournament options just because of the upside he brings. There's risk because Terry Stotts just kind of messes with his minutes enough that you can't be too confident. He does have a good backup in Zach Collins, who is capable of making the most out of his minutes and kind of making it easy for Stotts to keep Nurkic on the bench. But just in terms of projecting ceiling, Nurkic's price always is too low for the ceiling that he offers because of all the uncertainty around him. This is a matchup where he should do really, really well as long as he's able to, stay on the floor. And so I like him a lot at 6,400. And then on the flip side with JaVale McGee, his ownership keeps being not really that high. And I think it's because, and it's perfectly reasonable, people are just still kind of scared to completely buy into JaVale McGee as a 30-plus minute player who is going to just, be insanely productive when he's on the floor. But the conditioning's better this year. He supposedly is not having issues with his asthma that he had in Golden State that made it hard for him to play, big stints at, of playing time. And he's even made strides defensively in learning, where he's supposed to be to not be a liability on that end. So I'm, as confidently as I can, I'm buying into the JaVale McGee minutes here. He's obviously a productive player when he's on the floor. The price tag's still very, reasonable for the role that he's in now. So I like both of those guys. LeBron, obviously perfectly fine. He's I still think his upside is kind of limited by, how many mouths there are to feed on this team in terms of scorers and also, players that handle the ball with, Lonzo and Rondo and Brandon Ingram, all being guys that can facilitate and run the offense. But LeBron is still averaging 1.3 DraftKings points per minute this season. And, he's still getting his shots. He's still getting plenty of assists. He's doing everything. So I have no issue with LeBron. I think he probably does have the highest floor out of Davis and Harden tonight. Since Davis is dealing with the injury, we don't know exactly what we're getting from Harden as, in his first game back. So I do think LeBron has the highest floor at the very least. And I have no problem, with him at all. And then Lillard and McCollum, they're both guys that I mentioned earlier. The guard positions don't really have much in the upper mid range where I think that there's a ton of opportunity cost to paying up. So it makes me more willing to take a chance on, a kind of overpriced Lillard, but we know that he can go out there and give you 55, 60 fantasy points. I think this is the kind of slate where I'm more likely to end up with him than on some others.
All right. As we dip down through the mid-range, which kind of coincides with the wing shooting guard guys, we've got Kyle Kuzma, Brandon Ingram, Al-Farouq Aminu. I like all three of those guys. Pricing wise, I think I'm fine going with Aminu, looking at that 20% discount on DraftKings to the other two, and a path that not maybe as high of a ceiling, but more likely to get to 30 fantasy points than either of those guys. Zach Collins' price is appropriate. However, he's one of those guys that we prefer a little better when Nurkic is in foul trouble or not on the court. He's one of those guys, that rule we talked about, where if you set up in your optimizer and create a group and say, of these two players, if you're going to play one of them, just play one only ever, so you don't end up with both those guys on the same team. That'll kind of cap their upside. Evan Turner, an intriguing discount guy on the late slate at 4,900. So that's someone you can look at. Anybody you want to finish off here with no real discount news available? We're not really waiting on any, but any of these guys from a point per dollar standpoint intrigue you as we finish up our analysis today, Adam? That'd be Kuzma, Ball, Ingram, etc.
No, not really. I mean, it's just tough to be confident in any of those guys because the minutes are going to bounce around, the productivity is going to bounce around. So they're guys, if they end up in some tournament lineups for me, fine. But they're not guys that I'm looking at in cash games. They're not guys that I'm looking at as core plays.
All right. For those of you trying the promo code DFS strategy, if you're not getting the Fantasy Cruncher add-on, just reach out to support at FanVice, or pardon me, at FanVice. Good God. That was the first I've done that. But hey, we still are kind of FanVice and have FanVice products under the Awesemo umbrella. That's support at awesemo.com. I'll find out what the actual instructions are, and I will make sure that I'm aware of those next time so I can mention that as well. But I do know it does include the Fantasy Cruncher add-on as part of the trial. All right, Adam, we're going to dip on out of here. For those of you guys here that have not hit the like button, please do. It does help us in searches and algorithms. So that is something that is very important. And you can subscribe to the channel to get all of your notifications when shows are going live. And we have all kinds of live shows. Later today, we have it'll be Awesemo, and it will be special guest Evan Silva talking about DFS NFL. We've got a big slate for Sunday, and there are a bunch of good games. Late night hammers are involved, particularly with the highest scoring game there in the 4 o'clock hour with involving the Saints. We do have a nice Sunday night game with Green Bay going into Foxborough to take on the Patriots. On the front page, you've got a nice I think it was 1,900 words. I wrote, it was a little light today. 1,900 words on that game, breaking it down for the single game slate from yours truly. That is a courtesy article that is free and available on the Awesemo front page. Check out our stuff, guys. We've got a lot of good content here, and we're going to be coming up with a lot more. With that, gamers, you can follow me at EMACDFS. It's Adam at ShipMyMoneyDFS, and it's Awesemo at Awesemo_COM. Think Awesemo.com. No dot on Twitter, so Awesemo_COM. With that, gamers, good luck.